people, farmers, attending a protest planned tomorrow outside Parliament.
Parliament was surrounded by 5 columns, 234 paralysed streets. More than 1,800 tractors overran London. And in a little 14 minutes, the capital was positioned under total siege. It's not a union negotiation. This conflict is between the farmers and the government. By 8:30 a.m., the roads were cut off into London. At 8:54, the Westminster was breached by tractors. 9:15, the streets were lined with tank. More than a dozen tanks were reported by witnesses. In agreement with these demonstrators. Abruptly, there were rumors that a tank had crushed a police vehicle. Police declined to verify this. The farmers were unconcerned. This was the start of the end. By precisely 9:30, tractors started blocking up each entrance and head out to the government quarters. According to Karma, anyone taking part in the siege would encounter incarceration. However, the demonstrators had there is nothing left to lose. When you make a demand £400,000 from farmers who barely make $30,000 merely to retain their land, you don't simply destroy a company. You give over the country's food security to repair a damaged ledger. And following that, you are depriving people of their assets, who provide food for the country in order to pay benefits for newcomers, essentially purchasing the victory in the upcoming election with the ruins of British agriculture. By midday, analysts' £82 million was the estimated damage. Rachel Reeves and starred Mayor visit farmers as wealthy individuals. Indeed, their territory is valuable, but in practice, they make pennies. Although the primary London's tractors continue to obstruct highways, the unthinkable becomes feasible. Food the capital supermarkets reserves will, at most, last 2 or 3 days. Warehouses that were never intended for cities overrun by thousands of tractors. While Starmer said nothing, and the police platoon are battling to prevent tractors from driving directly into the legislature meeting. Across the nation, waves took to the streets, calling for Starmer's resigning and carrying placards that said, "No farmers, no food." By nightfall, the biggest nightmare for the government came to pass. Thousands of individuals who media outlets labeled as far-right organizations poured onto the streets, blended with the tanks and the tractors. It turned to become a nuclear blend. It's not about a budgetary disagreement. It concerns who genuinely provides food on this island, and who has the ability to starve it. The columns that were not urban and crossed the M25 freeway. Activists. They weren't weekends either. Demonstrators. Numerous people had driven hundreds of miles away from the areas, compelling their large equipment through police barriers that Starmer mistakenly believed would hold on. 3 million people watched a TikTok video. Opinions. It depicted a police van attempting to obstruct the tractor's convoy and confront the immediate repercussions 8 seconds later. In 2 hours, the video was taken down. Classified as a violation of violence. Waves. There were no demonstrators in the lobby. They arrived at the siege. A method that tracks returning to a rural populace forced into a corner by a tax law intended to eliminate their presence. There wasn't any traffic jams. They were deliberately strangled. Logistical bottleneck points to observe how long can the capital endure without a supply chain prior to the government pauses. And Westminster found out tonight something horrible. Barriers made of concrete failed. Vans with armor were shoved aside. Additionally, Starmer's government observed in paralysis. Officers on the scene weren't reluctant to prevent them. They were merely surpassed by 10 tone-on devices that are insensitive to a baton. A radio message in South London stated, "We just lost Sector 15. Can't stop them," asking for prompt deployment of military hardware. On the ground, protesters started shooting fireworks aimed straight toward police shields. In Belfast, 123 people were arrested. 2 they set fire to police trucks. Rumors regarding a potential imposition of martial law started to spread. Starr is anticipated to, in the morning, make a statement. Within a police negotiation in central London, the unit was put into action. However, 200 meters distant, there were reports of 7 hospitalized officers. Everything was cancelled. The tractors have unwavering demands. Complete elimination of agricultural changes in property relief, or the blockage still exists. Slummer's cabinet examines a spreadsheet and finds an item worth £3 million. Things ought to be subject to taxes. The farmer examines at that same location and observes a workplace it brings in less than £30,000 yearly earnings. The new 20% tax on there is no tax on assets worth more than $1 million. Wealth. It is a tax on being alive. Children are currently dealing with a bill of £500,000 as soon as a parent dies away. No cash reserve is available for payment. The sole choice is to sell the fields, ruining the company, and putting an end to centuries of custom. Beside farmers and Parliament condemn Starmer as a city accountant who is aware of nothing to do with British farming. Protection was guaranteed by Labour, but they have given the death penalty to the little holder. Farmers are incensed that they are raiding their assets to plug budget gaps brought on by rising welfare expenses and lodging for asylum seekers. They observe their life's labor being liquidated to pay for a state that hates them. This is not about safeguarding tax havens for the privileged. The goal is to save the men who wake up around 4 in the morning to provide food for the country. According to Rachel Reeves, it's closing a loophole. The demonstrators refer to it as state-approved theft. Every tractor was parked. On Whitehall is a company that won't last till April 2026 if this law stands. They're not requesting subsidies. They are calling for the appropriate to transfer their means of subsistence to their kids without the government taking a deadly wound. It's an obvious message. Murder the tax or we destroy the entire nation's farming. Not only is Britain losing its food security, it is actively demolishing it. Keir Starmer constructed his economic strategy based on a single illusion, that he could raid rural areas to maintain equilibrium. The books without repercussions. This evening demonstrated the deadly nature of that computation. When the state independently declares war producers, it doesn't make money, it suffers from starvation. The choking tractors farmers provided the capital for tonight. Starmer won't comprehend. The disobedience reverberated throughout Whitehall. Due to tax obligations, Rachel Reeves declines to raise. Additionally, the supplies paralysis chain is the immediate outcome of a chancellor who doesn't pay attention. There is no government in Britain. The United Kingdom is being dissolved till it goes hungry. For weeks, agricultural unions discreetly raised the same frantic caution. These blockades are not a political ploy. They are strategies for survival. Video from the M25 demonstrated the enormity of the mobilization that resembles a military operation. The same large equipment used currently utilized as a barrier to harvest wheat exits. The identical orderly columns of Manchester truck drivers joining the siege. And the same horrifying image of old-fashioned tanks rolling beside tractors, leaving law enforcement completely surpassed. These organizations are not lobbyists. These are desperate and well-planned. In the dirt, farmers are painting a line oppose a policy that eliminates them. The government was also aware of the math. They possess the land values. They possess the margins of profit. They are aware of £3 million a pound farm makes less than $30,000 annually. Year. However, under karma, each and every one of these details are submitted under the same designation, wealth subject to taxation. In the past, Britain profit-based taxation. It is now tax-based. On jealousy. That's how we get at this ridiculous reality. An extreme activist obstructing a path for climate ideology de-escalated protection and provided tea. At the Bell Hotel, a counter-protester treated with consideration for the community. However, a farmer from Britain using a tractor to preserve the memory of his family was received with massive threats to armored vans detained and handled like a domestic danger. In the countryside, this double standard. This is felt by the working class. Betrayal. Additionally, the supply chain tonight snapped beneath it. Because when a country understands that the administration is more concerned with obtaining money rather than making sure there's bread on the shelves, and the order disappears more quickly than the food stocks. This evening wasn't merely a deadlock. It was an impasse. A number of officers disclosed the internal panic anonymously the room of command. How can tanks be stopped? Protocol doesn't exist. They didn't lack labor force. They didn't have the physics to transport 10 tons of steel. Authorization to it is meaningless to clear the road when the heavy industry has walled off the road. When the government is afraid of those who feed them when clergymen go into hiding because their actions have led to a logistical breakdown, a nation ceases being operational, it begins to be under siege. Additionally, Britain is being besieged methodically and slowly, entirely. Karma based his spending plan on just one message. Those with the widest shoulders ought to bear the cost. However, that message has evolved into something other. We'll take away the working farmer's assets to make up for the state's shortcomings. Every choice Starmer takes regarding this tax is filtered via a single conceit: that the farmers will simply file for bankruptcy, not realizing that when you take he has nothing after receiving everything from a man. All that was left to lose were his chains. Abruptly, an unsettling event occurred. A truck drivers vowed to repeat the gasoline crises of the year 2000. If this occurs, it might be the last under Starmer. Nail in the coffin. Truck columns were observed traveling in the direction of London. These might not be meaningless dangers. Farmers as well as there is a long-standing partnership among truckers. If the tractors keep obstructing the truckers and the government district drain gas stations throughout the nation, it can result in an instant economic collapse. Within 3 hours, police were targeted by masked groups. Units that were used to contain the disturbance. They relocated apart from the farmers and used their own agenda. Officers noted abrupt waves of assaults originating from the side streets. Rocks struck patrol vans and broken glass. A number of riot lines were compelled to shift under heavy pressure. Demonstrators dressed in black unexpectedly encircled police forces. The agricultural disagreement was disregarded. Completely. The border was their main concern. Problem. They marched in the direction of hotels. Utilized for migrants in the past lodging. The masses called for an all-boat arrivals are immediately stopped. Quit. The sound of the boats filled the alleys while law enforcement tried to maintain the perimeter. A second group of masked protesters forced their way through an unprotected intersection in South Belfast. They kept yelling, "Save our kids!" Officers establishing a cordon of defense. Several vans were struck by bottles and rubble. Emergency personnel found it difficult to access cars that are damaged. Police commanders reported disjointed communication between multiple districts. Teams of surveillance personnel identified autonomous clusters operating without cooperation with any groups of tractors. These groups focused on specific areas, unconnected to the initial demonstration. A few after losing, the officers were pulled back. Command of adjacent intersections. The masked groups intensified their strategies at unexpected speed. They made an effort to envelop hotel entrances in a number of burial sites. Officers on the ground explained the circumstance as unstable and erratic. Instructions for reinforcements were sent out on a regular basis. Riot shields took in a torrent of improvised projectiles. Star's briefing was delayed by an additional 3 hours, so the tax raid is still going on unchecked. The A-tractor roadblock turns into a siege. The supply chain breaks due to the Britain's administration is unwilling to change course. Becoming more ravenous with every hour that passes. Waits. He refers to it as budgetary justice. The countryside refers to it as the conclusion of an business. Panic isn't limited to the markets, it's found in homes. British families had to deal with a cruel economic reality. The government will cause a local producer to go bankrupt for a budget line, but it will fund the treasury is being drained by a crisis. Your legacy may be taxed to death, however, their poor management is shielded at all expenses. Class conflict splits a nation more quickly than debt. And this evening, the farmers were not afraid. It was in the clergymen who discovered they have provoked those who provide them with food. This is the breakdown of a food system. Not through arrogance rather than drought. When the M25's engines roared, every police command center in London sought a strategy from Downing Street. No, there was a plan. Rather, the Home Office issued an instruction that was characterized by total paralysis. One that the police explained as submission under the garb of formality. Preserve public order while avoiding large machinery. Interacting with hefty equipment. That's the sterile expression. Now used to characterize the unachievable goal of halting old tanks and 10-ton harvesters led by guys with there is nothing left to lose. The government didn't freeze due to the sound. It's froze after the police discovered a riot. Bricks, not tractors, are stopped by shields. Several Treasury insiders leaked the same conceit. Each and every appeal from the field of agriculture is rejected as the grievance of the rich. It makes no difference if milk is disposed of in the sewers. It is irrelevant. When bread runs out, distribution centers fail, or the economy suffers, £82 million every 4 hours. The top priority for Whitehall is not food security. It is income gathering. Reeves's advisors have become obsessed with closing a tax loophole that they prefer to see the empty shelves than acknowledge they misjudged the rural community's resolve working class. The first is Britain. Country in the G7 where the administration more than a recession, a farmer is afraid. The siege tonight was completely predictable. DARA conducted 5 distinct impact studies alerting people to widespread bankruptcy, crumbling domestic production, the epidemic of mental health and impossibility of farming communities of paying the 20% tax without making a sale land, a growing dependence on imports, red flags and strategic vulnerability about the brittleness of just-in-time systems of delivery. Every one of these cases was marked for immediate examination. The Starmer disregarded them all. AIDS asserts the Prime Minister downplayed the dangers, since he thought the farmers would just bear the expense. Take on the expense. Tankers, meantime, are retreating from Manchester. There are no shelves in Londoners, and Birmingham residents are instructed to ration food in a capital of the first world. The tragedy that is taking place isn't only financial. It is the eradication of culture by spreadsheet. Hat the following British farmers of this generation never assumes control of the vehicle. Young men and women who spending their early years in the dirt are now leaving, realizing they can't take a vacation to pay a £600,000 tax debt. Even in business. The vultures have already circling. International investment companies are observing the mayhem with checkbooks prepared, ready to purchase distressed British territory for pennies on the pound as soon as they are sacrificing food security in favor of a moral position that crumbles the instant the ports are blocked. The reaction of the police has just made the animosity worse. Video taken from the embankment reveals officers cutting tires on farms' trailers. A strategy never used against the adhesion of climate activists, the tarmac by themselves. It's a deliberate escalation directed toward a group the state thinks it will eventually legislation. However, they misjudged the desperation. When you're cornered, it bites like an animal. When you support a farmer is besieged, and he parks a 10-ton plow on the doorway of the Prime Minister. This is referred to as a disturbance by the media. The moment will be referred to in history books. The countryside declared.